There are many different copies of the Declaration. There's the one that's actually physically signed by the founders of the Declaration of Independence, and that is at the archives. There is the Dunlop copy, which was the first broadside printed on July the 5th. And on July the 6th, the first newspaper copy was printed in Philadelphia at the Pennsylvania Evening Post. And it's a very rare copy. There are only 19 left, 3 in private hands. The rest are in institutions. So I had a chance to buy it at an auction, and I did it. Well, the Newseum is the leading place in the United States, obviously, and in the world that lets people know about the value of newspapers and what newspapers have done for our society and our country. So what better place would there be to put the first copy of the Declaration of Independence in a newspaper other than the Newseum? Well, remember the Second Continental Congress was meeting for several months, and the ultimate resolution of what they did was to declare independence, and they wanted to explain why they declared independence. So they had a Declaration of Independence that was drafted largely by Thomas Jefferson, though Benjamin Franklin and John Adams were also on the committee that helped oversee it. And then after the Congress debated what should be in it on the 3rd and the 4th, they then had the final product, and they took it next door to Mr. Dunlop, and the next day the newspaper also printed it. And most people in the United States got their reading of the Declaration of Independence from the newspaper copy, because it was read in Philadelphia by people there, but also other newspapers then took the text of the Philadelphia paper and they ran it in their own newspapers. Actually, the man who owned the Philadelphia Evening Post was a man who was later accused of being a loyalist to the crown, and he was at some point considered to be dangerous to the colonies, and he was treated poorly for a while. Ultimately, he was exonerated from that, but he was a man, like many people, who initially was supportive of the government of the British. Then he supported the colonials, but then at some point he went back and forth. So many people had that same view. In fact, at the time that the Declaration of Independence was issued, probably no more than 30% of Americans were firmly in favor of withdrawing from the British Union. Well, I think the newspapers played a role as transmitting what was going on in Philadelphia. So newspapers around the country began to publish what was going on in the Philadelphia Second Continental Congress. They also later published what was going on in the Constitutional Convention. So I think newspapers played an important role, and people look forward to reading their newspapers. Again, they didn't come out daily everywhere, and not every city had a major newspaper, but many of the major cities did. Philadelphia at the time was the largest city in the United States, but only had about 40,000 people. Remember, the people who were in the Second Continental Congress and later the people in the Constitutional Convention were educated people, and they tended to read newspapers. So the most influential people in the country were reading newspapers, and they read them very voraciously. And so I think newspapers were quite influential, particularly because the newspapers had so much news. They didn't have that many ads, relatively speaking. There was a lot of news on the front pages, actually, and people read them very carefully. You can see any artifact online today. Everything is digitized. So you can sit in your home in any city in the United States, any city in the world, and look at almost any artifact, any object in the world. Why is it important to go to museums, and why is it important to see artifacts? I think it's important to go to museums and to see the artifacts there, because I think when you do so, it tends to inspire you to learn more about the subject. And in various surveys that go on from time to time, Americans demonstrate very little knowledge about their country. Less than half the Americans can now name the 3 branches of government, which is hard to believe. So as a result of that, I think when you tend to go to museums, particularly things relating to our American history, you look at the artifacts and you might get inspired to go back and learn more about it. And my theory is that if people learn more about our history, they might be better citizens, and if we have better citizens, more informed citizens, we might have a better government.